I'm gonna kick this over to Durf. Durf is spending every single day, all day at the Capitol, and he didn't go yesterday because he was spending all day at the Capitol. So I think it's proper to have Durf give this legislative intro.
Uh, sh sure. Uh, we are in the waning days of the session. It's going to be sometime, sine die is going to be sometime um, between next Friday, a week from tomorrow, and the following Wednesday is what it's looking like. I think it's probably going to bleed into the following week a little bit, but things are winding down. The major thing that needs to happen is the budget. The legislature can't leave until the budget is fully signed and sent to the governor. It's constitutionally mandated. So they're not going to leave until they do that, or it will certainly require an immediate special session. In addition, there's this big issue over property tax relief. So there's some big outstanding issues, but we are getting close at this point. The Senate has and the House have moved the deadlines back for transmittal of revenue bills by 2 days. They were originally going to be, I believe, Wednesday of next week, and now it is Friday. And so that gives them some additional time to transmit the revenue side of things over and wrap things up. But in general, it's sort of a mixed session. We've had some good and some bad. But the governor is starting to get a lot of bills at this point. And so that you'll see as we go through the slides that there's a bunch of information, a bunch of bills sitting in front of him. And once he actually does receive it, he basically has 10 days to take action. And so we also have 10 days to sort of do the necessary outreach, get the calls in to encourage him to support or to veto whatever it is we're talking about. Governor doesn't deal with resolutions, just legislation. So we don't need to worry about resolutions going to him. Those only stay with the legislature. So with that, I think we can move into the meat of our presentation. And I think that Ben needs to come out of the woodwork here and talk about polystyrene because he did a gentleman's job in getting this bill over the finish line.
Thanks. They've been a part of a really fun team, a fun coalition of folks working on it. And we're not quite done. So we need the governor to sign it. And we're fearful that we could be a target for a veto because it just slipped through the Senate on the littlest, teeniest margin. So our third reading vote was 26-22. Our second reading and amendment to get it back to good shape again were even closer votes of 26-24. So anybody that can reach out and contact the governor about phasing out polystyrene food containers. I think that there's kind of two winning messages. It seems that more on the Republican side, the message of actually consumer protection, that there's concern about eating food out of these containers because they leach chemicals and make us sick, impact our nervous system, and can make us have higher risk of cancer, et cetera. It seems that that's what some, at least the Senate side Republicans are more concerned about rather than environmental impacts, the pollution control, the litter on the landscape. And on the House side, it was a little more interest in what can this do for some of the composting industries, agricultural industries. So I would say if you do reach out, and please do focus on consumer protections, and also just make sure that your message is really tailored on this is only regulating food containers. We want them to know this is just a very specific target that we have here. So yeah, fingers crossed. Let's see if we can get it the rest of the way.
Great, and I'll jump in on SB 188, another big victory. This passed out of the legislature on Saturday was the final vote. This is the Montana Shared Solar Act, Solar Shares Act, that allows for these central projects to be built and for community members to subscribe to that energy and get a bill credit proportional to the energy generated, and is a huge win for being able to access the benefits of solar if you have financial or other barriers such as renting to getting your own solar array. So this is passed out of the legislature and is also headed to the governor's desk. And this is another issue where we are really wanting to make sure the governor knows we want this. We want another tool in our toolkit in addressing Montana's energy challenges and addressing rising energy costs. Definitely would love to see that kind of support going that way.
And a quick question in the chat for the two of you. Any words you can speak to the governor's likely position on these bills?
I can go
Let
first
Ben
on
go first.
477. This is only just rumors, so I have not sourced this back to Governor Gianforte, but that he would probably be disinclined to support a bill of this nature is what I've heard. And then, you know, it not being a super strong vote makes it a little more vulnerable. So we'll find out, but I think that, you know, another potential advantage we have is that this does align with some of the Republican federal administration priorities as far as RFK Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services priorities go. So if we can also make sure that Gianforte is hearing that message a lot, that this is in line with the Trump administration's priorities for human health. We're fishing with dynamite to make sure that he leaves it alone or or better yet, signs it. So yeah, I haven't heard too many positive prognoses of how, you know, what his initial position would be on it. So fingers crossed, we can change his mind.
And for SB 188, I've heard that there's been some resistance from the governor's office, really leaning on some of the utilities talking points. So I'm sure they've been in their ear, but it really was passed resoundingly. The last vote was, I think, 46-4 on the Senate on Saturday. So being able to point to how much support this had in the legislature, as well as really focusing on the need to just unlock an additional way to have more energy on our system, more affordable energy. We've really been focusing on leaving clean energy out of this discussion. And I think that is going to be how the kind of messaging we want to continue, that we want this affordable tool.
And we have Senate Bill 436, the Well Driller Association exempt well bill that we oppose. Thankfully, that was tabled in committee yesterday, but we are still being watchful. It's not dead till it's dead. So they will be watching tomorrow and next week to see if that revives itself.
All right. Basically, all of these are going to the governor at this point. But these are the big water and climate related bills that we've been following. HB 587 is the material damage coal mining bill dealing with water quality and quantity impacts outside of the permit boundary. HB 664 is the repeal of numeric standards and the state's purported attempt to go back to narrative standards with no plan for doing so. And that is also now in front of the governor's desk. And HB 685, the feasibility allowance for pollution. This is the bill that changes Montana's non-degradation policy and retitles it feasibility allowance, and also tinkers with the balancing test that the DEQ would normally sort of implement on considering the benefits of a particular project and weigh it against the impacts of pollution on the environment society. This passed second reading today, I believe, 17 to 36. 33. Sorry, my math's terrible. So we lost one one Democrat. I would say you could contact the senator, but or contact the Senate, but a better use of your time would be at this point to probably reach out to the governor's office on this one as well, because of that margin. And one Democrat detracting. I think this is probably almost certainly headed to the governor's office. So these are the three big bad ones that are going to the governor's office. We've killed a number more, but unfortunately, these three have squeaked through.
We just heard about 477, so we won't go back into that one, but another bill, House Joint Resolution 44 is also still in the mix. I think I gave you guys an update on this last week that it folded in for some of the language from House Joint Resolution 37, which was an interim study on PFAS. And so House Joint Resolution 44 is a little bit broader, looking at all endocrine disrupting chemicals and water quality. And so we're hopeful we can get that passed, and that will enable us to take some action on all of these crazy pollutants that we're finding them in way too many places. So contact your representative. That one has passed out of the House Business and Labor Committee and, I think it was House Natural Resources, and is awaiting second reading in the House.
And I meant to mention this on the last slide, but as Ben put in the chat, we'll have a summary slide of all the bills we're asking folks to contact the governor on. So you'll get another chance to see all of those bills.
Luckily, in the land use world, most of the problematic things have gone away, either been tabled or failed on the floor. So that's good news. We had these two bills that were concurred today or yesterday. The parking requirements, the minimum parking mandates bill. So that one was concurred with amendments. That was today or yesterday. So that's going to the governor next. And again, that one is limiting the amount of parking spaces that cities can require through zoning for residential units. It does not limit the amount of parking that can be provided. So that's a great bill for housing and for creating density and reducing sprawl. And the public transit bill, creating more opportunities to expand urban transportation districts, also passed the House, amended, and that one is also going to the governor. So contact the governor for those two bills. And I mentioned this one, but just want to reiterate, we are being very watchful of this exempt well bill. It is currently tabled, but if it were to be revived, the language is broad enough that it could create some issues.
And I'll quickly give an update on where the nuclear bills are. They both House Bill 623, which is allowing for siting of nuclear waste storage facilities. That final vote happened today, and that's going to be headed to the governor, as well as House Bill 696 for allowing the siting of the uranium enrichment and conversion facilities. We worked with some folks with the American Indian Caucus to move for some amendments to require a local vote of the county where that would be cited in for either of these facilities, as well as any local tribes near the facility. And we had some good discussion on the floor with those, but unfortunately, neither of these bills, one of them, it was stripped off in 623 and it didn't make it onto 696. So I'd encourage folks to contact the governor and at a minimum ask for a governor's amendment to bring back that voice of local tribes and the local counties.
Sorry, I couldn't find my button. So we had a hearing this week on HB 911. This is truly a 911 situation where the utility was trying to set up the ability to create a non-regulated entity that would serve large load and not be subject to the PSC oversight within the public regulated utility. It was a bizarre structure and all done, for anyone who understands legislative process, all of the extensive language in the bill was done through the definition section of what a public utility is, which is really odd. But ultimately, the problem with this bill is the dividing lines between the public utility that is regulated and that utility, the side of the company that is not regulated, that are both serving load in the state, was not defined. There was financial mixing between these two entities. And the problem with that is if you have an unregulated entity out there making bad bets, basically, out there serving load that might not show up, like data centers that say, oh yeah, we're going to be there for 15 years. And then the whole data center industry collapses because the DeepSeek, which is coming out of China, which is a faster way to do AI without quite as much energy, without anywhere near as much energy demand, because it does the computations more quickly. If you have a disruptor like that, the data center goes away, and then your utility is stuck having created all this infrastructure for that data center and going into debt to serve this data center because it was banking on the data center paying off these costs over time, and it brings your utility down. And that's the public utility that we would be relying on to go out and borrow money at a low rate. And if they have bad debt and one side of the utility goes, gets in financial trouble, that will hurt the regulated side of the utility. You need firewalls, serious firewalls between the regulated and any unregulated portion of a utility. And this bill did not have that intentionally. To me, it was very intentional because there's already a provision in law that allows them to do this, but all with Public Service Commission oversight. Utilities in other states do this with Public Service Commission oversight. And this was saying no Public Service Commission oversight. It was a very last minute attempt by Northwestern Energy to do some shenanigans. And I won't go into my conjecture on what that is. I have a pretty good sense. But anyway, there was a hearing on this on Tuesday, and the hearing I thought went quite well. The Energy Committee the chair decided not to take executive action on the bill. He said, nobody understands this bill. We're not taking executive action tonight. And they took executive action on everything else, I believe, that was sitting before them. So I don't think this bill's coming out of committee, but we sure could use everybody's help in calling committee members to make sure that that's true. There were a lot of questions, and I think they got it. It was the whole Public Service Commission opposed it through the Public Service Commission chair. That is very helpful. So with any luck, we won't have deregulation 2.0 in this state. We'll see. But I feel pretty good about how that went. And I think we're going to be able to kill that bill. And I'll let you know. Katie will send something out to you immediately if that bill comes back to life, because that is a disaster for existing customers. And the other one is the wildfire liability for utilities. We've talked about this ad nauseum. This bill is better than it was as introduced, but it's still a terrible bill that is going to make it harder for people whose homes, properties, or their livelihoods are impacted by wildfire. This makes the utility, makes it much, much harder to go after a utility who caused that wildfire. So it's unfortunate, especially when you have a utility that just simply doesn't behave like climate change is a real threat and is acquiring more of a coal plant. So two bad bills coming from our utility, and one I think we're going to kill. The second one is off to the governor's office. So it'd be great if you could call and ask him to veto it. I don't think he will. I think the co-ops really, really want this bill. But it's always good to say, have your 2 cents.
Next slide.
Got a couple questions on 490 in the chat, Anne. It passed 99 to 0 this afternoon. That's not a good ratio for us.
No, it's not. It's better than it was as introduced, and so a lot of Democrats just kind of throw in the towel. At this point in the session, they just throw in the towel. It hasn't been passing 99 to nothing, but third reading, I think they just said whatever. The other one is co-ops. Co-ops really want this bill. They really want protection. Co-ops have a very different structure than your private party utility. And so they have, an association that can help them with their wildfire mitigation plan, et cetera. And the co-ops went after this so hard. This was their number one priority. And, there's a lot of co-ops out there, and a lot of legislators live in co-op country. So that's my only explanation. And they simply don't understand. Some of them did, but they don't understand how this bill is going to make it more difficult. But people are going to find that out in the next big wildfire.
What about, can you speak to how the insurance industry came out on this bill, Anne?
Well, the insurance industry has its own interests. So it came out very strongly against it initially, but then they got an amendment to protect their interest. And I forget the name of what they wanted. They just wanted a subrogation clause that makes sure that they get, they have the ability to go after the utility in certain circumstances. They got their clause. They walked away from it. They didn't even show up in the Senate. So, and that was, it was a terrible bill as introduced in the Senate. When Teresa Manzella says, I can't vote for this bill unless it's dramatically amended, that bill needed work. But the insurance industry didn't even show up at that stage. So their interests are not our interests.
One more on 490. I think we're all horrified at how it's going. Can we ask the government for restricting this bill to co-ops, or ask the governor to do that?
You could do that. We had an amendment in the Senate to do exactly that, and it didn't go anywhere. Northwestern has power in this arena, and it was their highest priority bill as well. So that amendment didn't go on. I don't think the governor will put it on either. But you could thank Andrea Olson for bringing the amendment.
All right, and some more energy bills. We talked about SB 188. Another good one, HB 760, establishing solar consumer protection laws, has had pretty broad support, basically prohibiting any deceptive practices in door-to-door solar salesmen, and ensuring that customers know that they have a right to cancel contracts within 3 days of signing on. And that's had broad support. We're waiting second hearing to be scheduled in the Senate. The next one, HB 848, about funding the Montana Passenger Rail Authority. Unfortunately, this bill failed second reading, I believe, yesterday. It had a lot of support from folks out of the House, but there's enough people getting nervous about the budget that spoke out on the floor. But my understanding is there is a lot of funding for this planning to bring back passenger rail, and this isn't necessarily the only option. It is unfortunate, but there's going to be other things for that energy efficient form of transportation. HJ 46 is a study resolution to look at data center impacts to our energy system and those kind of large loads and how that might negatively impact other people on the system. So this is hopefully something that we'll have time to move along. We will see how the last days of the session go. But in any case, we will keep trying to make it apparent how much these can overdraw the energy resources available and really harm the other users, other ratepayers on the system. And then HB 939 actually was on the opposed side last week. This is kind of the the answer to a lot of the bad wind bills that came this session. It's giving some concessions just around some kind of industry standard setbacks and height considerations for wind turbines. There's amendments tacked on the other day in Senate Energy that really appeased any issues that were there. So now it's moving along, and we're feeling good about it. Going to the oppose, unfortunately, House Bill 122 was passed. This gives utilities default right of way for access for natural gas pipelines. Before, they were already using these rights of way, but there's a provision in place that they had to enter into agreements with local governments, local jurisdictions, and that is going to override that. And unfortunately, that is going to be to the detriment of those local governments. It's still headed to the governor though, so there's potential to ask for a veto. And then Shannon, do you want to talk about HJ 17?
Sure, yeah. HJ 17 is calling on Congress and the president to weaken or eliminate many of our bedrock environmental laws, and it also asks Congress to give more power to the president to do so in the name of national security. It is scheduled for second reading today. Has not come up yet on the agenda, but probably happening later tonight, so we shall see.
And I would jump in with one more energy thing that I don't think made it on this week, but HJ 54 is another study resolution. We had a hearing last night. It's studying waste to energy, and effectively, the point of it is they want to burn trash for providing energy. There's a lot of reasons why we don't do that. That technology has been available for over a century, and we've realized how harmful it is to human health, to water systems, to the environment. And it is just a study resolution, but we are opposing it because it's not something we want to consider. There are some more reasonable efforts out there around capturing methane that's released from landfills, but this really distracts from the real urgent need to reduce waste generation and to find better ways to recover materials instead of just incinerating everything.
And one more energy bill that we haven't talked about since the beginning of this session is House Bill 55, which is revising how a regulated utility, mainly Northwestern, does resource planning and procurement of resources, which is something that, the bill was introduced, we strongly opposed this bill. It was letting Northwestern off the hook for its resource planning obligations. And it was not allowing fair competition in resource procurement. And so we, in both the House and the Senate, were able to get a whole slew of amendments onto that bill. And it's actually now a pretty good bill. It does revise the resource planning process, which we still believe didn't need to be done. But it does create, some really great sideboards for us and mandatory public participation requirements within the law. And it establishes an independent evaluator to determine how Northwestern is running its resource procurement process to make sure it's fair. And that independent evaluator really, it appears, we'll see how things play out, but it appears they really will be independent. And their report to the commission will be public. So we know we'll have a lot more data on how Northwestern is running these resource procurement processes. And hopefully we won't end up with another, gold-plated Yellowstone County generating station when the utility goes out and gets some, bids for new generation resources. You won't have this, what really feels like a very rigged system where Northwestern picked its own really expensive gas plant as the only possible option that was available to it, when there were a lot of other bids that had been submitted that very likely would have fit the bill of what they needed. this independent evaluator should really help over time with preventing the utility from, I guess I should camera, preventing the utility from kind of sucker punching us with a bad resource that makes it a whole lot of money. So it's a bill we haven't talked about because we've been working on amendments all session. It is just about at the end of the line, and I think it's actually a good bill.
Great. I put HJ 54 and HB 55 in the chat. We don't have HB 55 on our website right now because we've been working on it. So hopefully we'll get an updated description for that in the next couple of days. So it'll be there for you as well.
A couple other good things have been happening, really. SB 301, which is creating this pre-approval process for transmission. This is a bill that we opposed. We definitely opposed as it was introduced. We have worked with the sponsor of the bill to get a lot of amendments on it in a way that we think it's actually it's a really interesting path forward for trying to get transmission projects, which are big and expensive, but desperately needed to try to get them off the ground. So this pre-approval process maintains environmental protections. It allows the Public Service Commission, even though it's a pre-approval process, it allows them to protect customers and make sure that we're not overpaying because the utility, gets pre-approval and then goes out and never has to go back to the commission for permission on how much it spent or overspent. This allows the commission to really claw back instances where the utility spends more than it should have. So I'm hopeful that this bill might help shake loose some transmission development in this state. And then the next one, SB 55, it's a great bill too, just because it increases the potential competition in the transmission development arena, not letting these regulated utilities control who gets to build transmission into and out of Montana, and making sure that if there's a private developer, which there are private developers out there who want to come in and build a transmission system in the state, that they have access to do so. So SB 355 is really aimed at Montana Dakota utilities out in the eastern part of the state, but it's a good bill. So we supported this one throughout.
And then a few resolutions about transmission. HJ 15 lays out the need for transmission to support affordable and reliable electricity. We're waiting scheduling for second reading in the Senate, but that's had broad support. SJ 12 is a study on congestion on interstate transmission pathways and some of the economic detriments that those have caused. That passed second reading today, 98-2. So more broad support. And then SJ 21 was heard yesterday in House Energy. This is a similar study resolution, but specifically looking at how Montana might coordinate with other states, explore a potential interstate compact about planning interstate transmission. So those kind of go hand in hand. It passed out of the committee and we'll be having second reading in the House shortly. And some more resolutions. HJ 12, we've talked about this in the past, is a bad resolution that really spreads a lot of misinformation about EVs. And this is actually a second bill that that wasn't acted on in Senate Energy and could end up just getting tied up there. It just, points out a lot of things that aren't true about how EVs can be used in Montana and adequate for Montana drivers' needs. So we're hoping that stays there and doesn't make it out of that Senate Energy Committee.
There is a study bill that we are supporting, looking at home insurance premiums, studying what the causes behind the spikes are. There's a perception that Montana's increasing wildfire frequency is a part of that reason. There's probably multiple reasons for those premiums getting higher. But if we're to acknowledge that wildfire is a major component, then we will have to talk about climate change. So this is going to be a great bill on multiple fronts, and we are looking forward to it.
SJ 11 is a great interim study resolution as well, looking at farmers markets and food security, regional and local food networks, and is sailing through. So hopefully we'll get a better look at that. Obviously, how we choose the diet that we choose is really important for climate, and also where our food comes from is really important. So we'd love to see those things interpreted into some law.
Laura, do you want to talk about SJ 19?
Yeah, so SJ 19 is a great study resolution to investigate various opportunities for increasing different transportation modes in Montana, especially public transportation, but it's pretty broad. It includes autonomous vehicles, and it includes a little bit about the rail authority, but it's a very timely bill, and we hope to see that one pass.
And HJ 62. I'm not, Ben, is that you? Having a hard time keeping track of all these.
So there are two study resolutions right now that are really kind of closely aligned, and one is more focused on wildfire and land use planning impacts. So where we build, and kind of trying to get the legislature to look at the WUI more specifically, and making some choices about where we build. And the second one is more focused on rising property insurance rates. And there's obviously a big relationship between those things. And so one has started to move. It's passed out of House Natural Resources. The second has a hearing on Tuesday, and we are really close to the end of the session. Don't know exactly how much time we have left. So it's possible that, one of those might succeed and the other does not. And hopefully some of the good ideas in both of them can still make it.
Carry forward. Yeah. All right. I can do the MEPA bills. Long story short, MEPA is getting a serious, unfortunate makeover this session. There are two MEPA bills currently in front of the governor that are direct changes to MEPA based upon the held decision primarily, and those are SB 221 and HB 285. SB 221 is the bill that dramatically limits basically what emissions can be considered to just those emissions within the fence line. The language is just terrible in the bill in terms of how it's written and how narrow they really want these analyses to be. And 285, the biggest problem with that is that it eliminates that constitutional satisfaction language at the very beginning. And then HB 291 is sort of MEPA adjacent. It's really snowing outside now. HB 291 is MEPA adjacent, and basically what it says is that the state can't implement any regulations on carbon emissions unless and until the federal government acts, well, any emissions for that matter of anything under the Clean Air Act, unless the federal government has done so already, and they can't go beyond it. So this bill is sort of a dark horse that prevents the state from regulating carbon emissions. So those bills are in front of the governor and are a real problem. That's not to say that we're not already thinking about potential legal strategies to continue pushing our cause forward. There is a good MEPA bill that we do want to see signed into law, and that's SB 270 by Representative Zolnikov out of Billings. And the big important thing with SB 270 is it eliminates some of the problematic and unconstitutional language that was, it's listed as SB 270, but it should be HB 270. Some of that unconstitutional language that was found by HELD to be in violation of both our Clean Healthful Environment Clause and some of the other considerations in our Constitution. So we want to see that bill signed. It's sort of confusing because there's some coordinating clauses between them, but it's in all likelihood, they're all going to be signed. And so we just want SB 270 to be signed because it puts us in a better position overall. So we can support that bill.
And as a reminder, that's HB 270. So.
Yes. My bad.
All right, somebody want to do the overview? This is just the governor's list of asking the governor to oppose the bills on the left and support the bills on the right. It includes most of the ones in this presentation, but of course they're not all listed here. So I'll leave this up for a minute.
Yeah, we think these are the ones that the governor does need to hear from people on. I mean, there's resolutions don't go to the governor, so there's no need to contact the governor on those. Some bills are just gonna get signed. So if we had high priorities, this was our first guess at our highest priorities for contacting the governor. And it's possible that other staff are going to object with this list. So Durf, are we missing anything?
I would potentially just add the HB 685 to the water quality related request for a veto, which I talked about earlier, dealing with the non-degradation policy and this new term called a feasibility allowance. And
what was that number again?
That would be HB 685.
Thank you.
Yep. Take a screenshot. And something that you may not have noticed that I just sort of thought of as we went through these slides is I'm not sure we had a judiciary slide this time around. And that's because we are looking real pretty right now as far as the judiciary is concerned, which is was not easy, but I mean, all of your work and reaching out to people and all the behind the scenes stuff, I would say pretty much all the meaty judiciary bills have died at this point or are soon to die, which is a fantastic place to be because we will be certainly relying on the court system for the next 4 years.
And anyone on the policy team, I've put the governor's contact information in the chat. Do you have intel on what the best way to contact the governor's office about these bills are, and if they should be contacted about each bill separately in separate comments?
No, I don't. I would try to do things in separate comments. I do think that that's a good idea.
Yeah, I would say separate emails requesting no votes or yes votes or vetoes or signatures, I guess. I'm going to
right.
Thought process here.
Great. And if any of you start contacting the governor and feel you have a lot of success via email or via phone, please let us know and we'll make sure to let other people know as well. We rely on your intel just as much as ours. Yes, I put the contact information. There's an email contact form, a phone number, and an email address in that comment, Gary. It's right at the end. I'll pop it in there again though. So there's three modes of contact in that comment I just put in. All right. We got a brief rate case updates from Nick.
Yeah, so if folks have been following the rate case, this is not in the legislature, but this is Northwestern back in July, submitted an application at the Public Service Commission to increase our rates again. That was after they increased them 28% for residential customers last year, or whenever that was. The rate case hearing was supposed to happen starting this coming Tuesday, but in true Northwestern fashion, they are not following the rules. And while the deadline to file any settlements was actually March 24th, they filed a settlement this Monday, which was 3 weeks late, which changes a lot of the calculus. The commission decided that they were not ready to hear the rate case because it changes everything, and the staff wasn't ready to really provide meaningful input. So they voted on Tuesday to postpone the hearing. There's not a rescheduled date yet, but there needs to be at least 20-day notice of a public hearing. So the soonest they would reschedule is they'd meet next Tuesday and decide on a date. So that would be 20 days from next Tuesday. So all of a sudden we are looking a ways out for actually when that hearing is going to be. Still sifting through what the settlement means, but effectively the Montana Consumer Council, a large customer group, and Walmart all signed on to this agreement with Northwestern. It is not all encompassing for issues in the rate case, but it does cover a lot of things. And it's not all bad. There are some good things and some other things that are we don't agree with. But I guess give a quick overview. There was a balancing account for investments in the coal strip plant that has been withdrawn, or at least in the settlement agreement, Northwestern would agree to withdraw a request for that. There's also an agreement to reduce the return on equity from 10.8% to 9.65%, which is the current return on equity Northwestern was approved for in the last rate case. And what that means overall is Northwestern, instead of requesting what was originally a 26% increase to base rates, this settlement would be a 20.2% increase to base rates. So it's lower, but it's still substantial, and that is for residential customers. There's other issues that aren't addressed in the rate case or in this settlement, specifically how Northwestern might be allowed to recover costs for the Yellowstone County generating station is completely in the air, and that'll be determined through hearings when that hearing is held, as well as about $11 million in investments in the coal strip plant. There's still a question as to will Northwestern be able to recover that from customers. And one of the issues that, aside from there still being a 20% base rate increase before the commission for residential customers, is that the settlement put a cap on how much other classes could be increased, but there's no cap on how much residential costs could be increased. So that we're concerned about how, if the commission were to accept the settlement, that might impact residential customers. And the last thing I would say is, in the end, it is the PSC that will decide the outcome of the rate case. They don't have to accept this settlement. Not all the intervening parties agreed to it, including MEIC. So there's still opportunity for pushing back on other pieces. And that decision won't come until after the hearing.
Thanks, Nick. So you can be sure MEIC is going to pay a lot of attention to when the hearing gets scheduled, and a lot of our partner groups are also paying close attention. So when we know something and they know something, you'll know something. We'll have a few minutes for questions, but quickly want to review the 1 million additional events we're taking part in over the next few weeks. So there are Earth Day events all across the state that you can find MEIC at, and these are just the ones that we're going to be at. So there are a lot more happening that we might not know about. These are all on our website. I'm going to put them in the chat. I'm not going to go through them specifically, but we'll just note that we'll be in Kalispell, Missoula. There's an online event next Tuesday through MSU. And we'll also be in Billings at the Sustainable Vendor Fair on the 26th. And so you'll see me, you'll see Shannon, and you'll see Denise, and that'll be a good time. And then we have other upcoming events. There's a one-stop legislative shop in Missoula with MCV, Wild Montana, Montpurg, Climate Smart Sierra Club. And so there will be some presentations and some conversation. It sounds like there's also a band. So you can come see Shannon and I in Missoula next week. And then MEIC is one of the sponsors of the Northwest Energy Coalition's Spring Conference, which is also in Missoula this year. It's all over the Northwest, so it's exciting that it's in Missoula this year. And if I missed any events, let me know, but I also put our website in the chat. As always, here's our team. They're lovely and amazing and so effective, and we're grateful for them. And we appreciate all of your support through the session. We're almost there. We're almost at the end. It's so close. But now, if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, pop your questions in the chat. Got a few minutes here.
I'm just adding one more thing to the chat because I realized I accidentally sent it just to Anne in the chat. And there was a question on what was one more bad water bill that we should be opposing and asking the governor to veto, and that is House Bill 685. That was also damaging our water quality.
Thanks, Ben. Question from Carol. Why not change the way utilities can increase their income so it's not so dependent on new construction?
You know, there are utilities who have done various things over time to increase their revenue or diversify their revenue. We do not have that kind of utility. You know, what you need to do that is you need an innovative utility that is trying to find new ways of doing things, that is not so constrained by its, you know, the way things have been done in the past. So there are utilities out there who are finding ways to generate revenue outside of the building giant power plants arena, but we don't have one of those.
Yeah, and there's also opportunities to shift the regulatory mechanisms of how Northwestern is rewarded. And those are kind of largely considered performance-based regulation, but similarly, that'd be something to build appetite for in Montana, but not something that has, at least among folks that would change those regulations, there's not probably an appetite now. So keep putting on the pressure and maybe we can get there someday.
Yep.
Ben noted that there were a couple of bills this session, but didn't get that far. Is there any precedent for taking over the utility like Missoula did with water?
We tried ages ago. I think in the late 90s, we tried to do that, and there were some laws established to prevent that type of thing from occurring. There was, of course, the Buy Back the Dams initiative ages ago. This is all long ago in the past. I think it would be incredibly difficult to do that in this state unless we have a campaign that we start working on now and don't expect to get there for years to come. Because we have to change laws in order to make that happen.
Is the constraint on generating new revenue at Northwestern more a function of the board of directors or the executives?
I think it's both. The executives get to pick their board of directors. And remember, there's only one Montanan on their board of directors. So it's not like they're terribly committed to Montana. This is a company that's incorporated in Delaware, has its headquarters and its CEO who live in South Dakota. Montana is their, you know, the utilities, it appears kind of cash cow. We certainly have a bigger service territory than South Dakota, but they're not committed to, you know, anything that is doing anything new. And I think that's reflected in both their board and it's reflected in their executives who've been around for a very long time. They desperately need new blood and they need to go bring in people from other utilities that have done some innovative work, because it's not these guys. Seems like every time they find somebody who is pretty decent, they move on pretty quickly.
All right, we got 2 more questions in the chat, and then I think we'll call it there. Would the community solar bill allow municipalities to develop community solar?
Yeah, so the way it's structured, anyone can own these. This can be owned by a developer, it can be owned by a utility, and my understanding is it could also be owned by municipality. And it's on the it's the responsibility of the owner to make sure that it is subscribed and all the costs are covered. So yeah, it's pretty open-ended.
Great.
And then I see from Gary, any chance of reducing the guaranteed profit margin for Northwestern Energy? So I mentioned that the return on equity, that percentage, is part of the question here. How much money can Northwestern make on each dollar that it spends? And that's a profit that is approved by the Public Service Commission. And in the settlement, one beneficial piece is they are lowering the requested return on equity, though it is still a very high 9.65%. So there's always, could definitely continue to argue to move it lower.
Thanks. I think we'll call that the last question for now, but I did put my email in the chat. So if you have more burning questions, send them to me and I'll connect you with the policy member of your choice. But also all our emails are on our website, so you can reach out directly. And thanks again, everybody. Good to have you all here tonight.